Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales. Tonight we travel back beyond cities and kingdoms, beyond stone temples and the first written words, to a time when our whole story was only beginning. Long before calendars or measured maps, the earliest humans were learning how to survive, how to adapt, and how to understand the wide and shifting world around them. They stood beneath enormous Ice Age skies. They crossed lands that no longer exist. They shared the earth with other kinds of humans who are gone now, and somehow, through cold and hunger and change, they endured. This is not only distant history, it is the opening chapter of you. In their footsteps lie the roots of language and family, of art and belief and quiet curiosity. The deeper we look, the more familiar they become. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, let your shoulders soften and your breathing slow. Let the day loosen its grip and allow your thoughts to drift back to the very beginning of our human story. Let's begin. Upright walking came long before large brains. Long before humans carried big, complex brains, our ancestors were already experimenting with a new way to move through the world. Walking on two legs freed the hands to carry food, tools, and infants, and it lifted the eyes to scan a wider horizon, which mattered greatly on open ground, where both danger and opportunity travel far. This was not a small adjustment of posture. It was a slow redesign of the entire body, from the curve of the spine to the angle of the knee and the spring of the arch in the foot. That redesign took a very long time, and it came with quiet costs, including new strain on hips and lower backs that we still feel today. Yet it opened a path that would eventually make long journeys easier and endurance possible across vast distances. In a sense, the first great human innovation was not a tool held in the hand at all. It was a stride. Lucy's kind walked tall long before our species existed. When a fragile skeleton was uncovered in the highlands of Ethiopia, she gave the world a face for a far older chapter of our story. She belonged to a species that lived millions of years before our own, and her bones carry a striking mixture of traits. The shape of her hips and legs shows a body built for walking upright, while her long arms and curved fingers hint at a life that still included climbing among branches. That blend suggests days spent moving between the ground and the trees, using both for food and for safety. She reminds us that evolution was never a tidy ladder climbing toward us. It was a branching, tangled landscape with many experiments running at once. Her kind were not waiting to become human. They were already successful in their own world, shaped by drought and predators and the shifting edges of forest and grass. To learn about them is to feel the word human stretch into something deeper and stranger than a modern face. Ancient footprints preserve a human-like walk, frozen in ash. In what is now Tanzania, soft volcanic ash once settled across the ground like fine powder, and a gentle rain turned it to paste. Then something remarkable happened. A small group walked across that surface, and their tracks hardened and were buried, sealed away like a single moment held in stone. When those prints were uncovered long afterward, they showed a heel that struck first, and a toe that pushed off last, a stride that looks startlingly familiar. The big toe pointed forward, aligned with the others, not turned out to the side like the grasping foot of an ape. The spacing suggests balance and quiet confidence, rather than a clumsy shuffle. Some who study the site even sense individuals walking close together, which invites soft questions about companionship and care. These are not bones reshaped into a careful guess. These are footsteps. They are direct proof that, long ago, someone crossed a damp stretch of earth and simply kept going, never knowing they would one day be followed by us. The first of our own kind appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago. We have learned this through a slowly growing trail of fossils and stone tools, which place our earliest known bones across the African continent, including remains from the north of Morocco. These people did not look exactly like us, yet they already carried some of our defining features, including a face that was becoming flatter and more familiar. Other traits arrived later, such as a rounder skull, which hints that our species was assembled in stages rather than appearing all at once. Africa at that time was a shifting patchwork of grasslands, lakes, and deserts, where groups could spread apart, drift into isolation, and later meet again. That long, braided history helps explain why our species feels both ancient and still changing. Every person alive today carries some inheritance from those early African beginnings. When you look far enough back, the origin of humanity is not a single town or a single moment. It is a whole continent, breathing slowly across time. Human faces grew smaller once tools began to do the cutting. When teeth no longer had to perform every difficult task, the shape of the face was free to change, slicing meat with sharp stone flakes, pounding roots against a stone, and scraping hides with a worked edge, all reduced the daily demand for enormous chewing muscles and heavy jaws. Over many generations, nature can quietly favor a lighter, smaller face when food becomes easier to prepare. Cooking pushed in the same direction, since softened food asks far less of the teeth and the muscles that drive them. The result is a story written in skulls. Our earlier relatives often had broad faces, heavy brow ridges, and large teeth, while later humans drift toward more delicate jaws and the distinctive chin that marks our own kind. It is a gentle reminder that culture can reshape biology given enough time. A tool resting in the hand can, across the long, slow reach of generations, help redraw the very bones of the face. Every person alive carries a trace of the same ancient ancestors. When you follow family trees far enough back, they stop being neat and begin to merge into a tangled canopy. Over countless generations, most lines of descent quietly come to an end, while a few continue on through chance, survival, and children who go on to have children of their own. Those who study our genes can trace certain threads, like the inheritance passed down through mothers and the one passed down through fathers, and both point again and again toward deep roots in Africa. The further back you look, the fewer separate ancestors remain in the picture, until everyone's history begins to overlap and braid together. This does not mean the world sprang from a single couple. It means that humanity is bound together through many people whose descendants spread widely across the earth. In a very real sense, your body is a quiet museum of ancient lives, carrying small traces of where earlier people adapted, healed, and endured. A small band left Africa, and, in time, peopled nearly every land. Imagine a world where the map keeps changing beneath your feet. Ice ages lower the seas, deserts swell and shrink, and green corridors open and close like slow doors. In that restless world, a relatively small population of our species moved out of Africa, most likely through the northeast, and then spread onward in patient waves. That modest beginning matters because it created what is sometimes called a founder effect. Only a limited slice of humanity's variety traveled outward, and it slowly diversified again as people adapted to new climates, new foods, and new diseases. They learned coastlines and river valleys and mountain passes. They met storms and predators and unfamiliar seasons, and still they kept moving. Over long stretches of time, those journeys reached across Asia and into Europe, out to distant Australia, and at last into the Americas. One regional story, carried in the bodies of a few, slowly became a story that belonged to the whole world. Stone tools are older than our species by more than 1 million years. Long before our own kind existed, earlier members of our wider family were already shaping stone into edge and point and purpose. The earliest widely recognized tools appear in Africa well over 2 million years ago, simple flakes struck from stone with real skill. Later came the graceful teardrop shapes we call hand axes, carefully worked on both faces and carried for many uses. These were never random rocks. They reveal planning, practice, and a clear mental image held in the mind before the first strike ever landed. Toolmaking even shaped how bodies evolved, since cutting and scraping reduced the need for massive teeth and jaws. It also widened what people could eat, making it easier to reach marrow, process tough plants, and prepare hides against the cold. A single well-struck flake can carry the signature of a skilled hand, preserved far longer than any spoken word. Technology did not begin with us. We were born into a world that had already been shaping stone for ages, and we simply inherited the craft. Much of the earliest technology has vanished because it was made of wood. Stone endures, and bone sometimes lasts, but wood almost always returns quietly to the soil, so the study of early life can feel like reading a beloved book with most of its pages torn away. The first humans almost certainly shaped digging sticks, throwing clubs, simple bowls, paddles, traps, and the frames of their shelters. Many of these would have been made from carefully chosen branches, hardened in fire or smoothed with a stone scraper. On the rare occasions when wood does survive, it is usually thanks to unusual conditions, like waterlogged ground, a bone-dry cave, or thick oxygen-starved mud. Those discoveries can be startling. A single wooden spear or a shaped wooden plank can instantly widen our whole picture of what these people could do. It also gently reminds us that ancient life was never a world of stone alone. It was a world of bark and reed, of fiber and wood, and nearly all of it has quietly slipped away. Language left no fossils, yet our bodies still whisper its clues. No ancient word survives carved in stone, and yet the human body carries hints of when speech may have begun. The shape of the vocal tract, the fine control of breath, and the delicate web of nerves that guide the tongue and lips all leave faint traces. Now and then a fossil preserves a small throat bone that anchors the muscles used in swallowing and speaking. The organization of the brain leaves its own indirect clues, both in the shape of the skull and in the sheer complexity of the tool-making and social life that early humans managed. Even without perfect proof, many who study this believe that some rich form of spoken communication arose long before writing, because cooperation on a large scale becomes far easier with shared words and detailed instruction. Language also transforms imagination. It lets you plan a hunt for tomorrow, warn of a river beyond the ridge, or teach a child to shape a blade without ever placing their hands in danger. Once words exist, culture can grow faster than the body ever could. Controlled fire quietly reshaped meals, nights, and even the size of our brains. Once fire became a reliable companion rather than a rare accident, it began to remake daily life from the inside out. Cooking softens food and unlocks more of its energy, which matters deeply, because the brain is a costly organ that demands a steady supply of fuel. Fire also makes water safer, hardens the tips of wooden spears, and turns darkness into usable time. Around a warm glow, a group can stay awake without constant fear of predators, and that alone changes the rhythm of learning and of friendship. Stories travel further when everyone is gathered and listening. Skills can be shown, corrected, and remembered. The archaeological traces are humble, just layers of ash and heat-cracked stone, yet what they imply is enormous. A tended flame is a portable piece of sunrise, carried into the night. It helped our ancestors turn harsh and open country into something like a home, and it turned the long darkness into shared and gentle time. Cooking gave us more energy, and our bodies slowly reshaped to match. Raw food asks a great deal of the body, forcing it to work hard for every scrap of nourishment. Cooking changes that quiet arithmetic by breaking down tough fibers and proteins, so that energy becomes far easier to absorb. It softens texture too, so that chewing takes less time and less effort. Across the deep reach of time, that shift may have helped support the rise of larger brains, since a growing brain needs a rich and dependable supply of fuel. At the same time, a digestive system that no longer has to labor so hard can afford to become smaller, freeing resources for other parts of the body. Cooking also reduces parasites and the illnesses carried in raw food, which matters greatly in a camp where everyone shares space and shares meals. Think of what that meant for an ordinary evening. A cooked meal could be shared by children and by elders with worn and aching teeth. It could turn a hard and risky day into a calmer, safer night. Firelight stretched the day, and storytelling grew in its glow. For most of the history of life, darkness alone decided the schedule. When a steady flame arrived, the day quietly gained a second life. Firelight let people mend tools, twist fibers into cord, and prepare food long after the sun had gone. More than that, it drew everyone into a shared circle of attention. Faces became visible in the warm light. Hands could demonstrate a knot or the angle of a careful strike. Children could watch and copy without ever risking themselves in a real hunt. A fire invites talk because everyone is gathered and still, and plans can be made for the day to come. Old events can be told again in ways that teach without scolding. In that small pool of light, a group becomes something more than tired individuals resting side by side. It becomes a living system for passing knowledge onward. The very first classrooms may simply have been camps lit softly by glowing embers. A little smoke could guard a camp by driving away biting insects. A camp beside water is a fine idea until the mosquitoes arrive in their clouds. Smoke changes everything. It confuses the insects that track us by our breath and our warmth, and it makes a sleeping group far harder to find. That can turn a miserable, sleepless night into one where real rest is finally possible. And rest matters, because exhaustion makes every task the next day harder and more dangerous. Smoke also hints quietly at planning. You do not want a roaring blaze that wastes precious wood and lights up the dark. Damp leaves, green branches, and slow-burning material can raise a steady, lingering haze instead. There is always a trade-off, since smoke can sting the eyes and trouble the lungs. Even so, the benefit is enormous in warm lands, where biting insects and the illnesses they carry can quietly drain a person's health. It is a small and practical detail, yet it reveals sharp attention. These people were not only mastering fire, they were learning to tune it like an instrument. The hearth became a center of gathering, where knowledge passed between generations. A hearth pulls people into a shared pattern. Food is cooked there, tools are repaired there, and stories naturally collect there, because everyone keeps returning to the same warm glow. That makes it a hub for teaching. A skilled toolmaker can sit close enough for a child to watch the exact placement of the fingers. A healer can show which leaves might soothe a wound. A parent can teach respect for fire, which is both a friend and a danger. The hearth also anchors memory. When a group returns to a familiar shelter, that fire spot becomes a landmark, marking home in a world without walls. Those who dig into ancient sites sometimes find the same hearth used again and again in one place, which speaks of routine and of tradition. And tradition is itself a kind of technology. It stores the answers to old problems and passes them onward without the need to reinvent everything. Around a hearth, culture can travel across whole lifetimes, one warm night at a time. Layers of charcoal in caves preserve ancient fires like faint timestamps. Deep in a cave, ash and charcoal can settle into thin sheets, then become sealed beneath later dust and sediment. Thousands of years afterward, those layers can still be read, almost like the pages of a book. Charcoal can be dated, which helps reveal when people used a shelter and how often they came back. It can even hint at what they burned, since different woods leave different signatures behind, offering clues about the plants and the climate of the time. The very way the charcoal is scattered can suggest what happened there, because a tight and tidy hearth looks quite different from a fire that was kicked apart or spread out for warmth. These traces are modest, yet they turn ancient nights into something we can actually study. A flame itself is usually gone within minutes. Its charcoal can linger for tens of thousands of years. That is what makes it feel so quietly powerful. It is proof that someone once stood in that darkness, made warmth and light, and lived a real evening there. An ancient hearth can still hold the seeds and bones of a single evening's meal. A hearth is only a small circle, yet it gathers a whole evening into one place. People cook there, eat there, talk there, and toss their scraps aside, and tiny fragments fall into the ash, where they can survive for thousands of years. Burned seeds can reveal which plants were gathered nearby. Charred slivers of bone can hint at what was eaten and how it was prepared. Even the arrangement of the stones can suggest whether a fire was built for warmth, for cooking, or simply for light. Sometimes there are many hearth layers stacked in the same spot, which points to return visits and to comfortable, familiar routines. These traces make the past feel close, because they capture ordinary life rather than dramatic events. You can almost picture someone turning a piece of food above the coals, or warming their hands while a child dozes nearby. A hearth is not a monument, it is a habit, and habits are where human history truly lives. Clothing let humans survive the cold long before the first farms. As people moved into colder lands, bare skin was simply not enough. Clothing began not as decoration, but as survival, a kind of engineering stitched from hides, fur, sinew, and plant fiber. The tools of the craft hint at the story. Scrapers prepared the skins, and sharp points pierced the holes. Later, delicate bone needles appear, which suggests fitted garments that trapped warmth far better than a hide, simply draped over the shoulders. There is even a strange clue hidden in biology. Studies of human lice suggest that body lice, which live in clothing, split away from head lice only after garments became common. Warm clothing opened the way into Ice Age Europe and the cold reaches of Northern Asia. It let families travel with infants and with elders who could never have endured such exposure unclothed. It made the long winter nights survivable in places where both fuel and food were uncertain. In that sense, clothing was a moving shelter, sewn together out of patience and necessity. The first needles allowed humans to sew fitted clothing for brutal winters. A needle is a quiet revolution. With a small eye to carry the thread, it allows tight, close seams that block the wind and hold warmth against the body. That matters enormously because a fitted garment turns a simple hide into something you can move in, work in, and sleep in without steadily bleeding away your heat. Needles also open the door to layering, which is essential in cold climates where the weather can change within hours. They suggest careful planning too. To sew, you need prepared thread, most likely from sinew or twisted fiber, and you need the calm and the time to stitch without rushing. A well-made garment also lasts, which means less time spent scraping fresh hides and more time for travel, for tending children, and for making tools. When these fine needles appear in the record, they signal far more than craft. They signal adaptation, the ability to expand into places where bare skin would fail within a single night. Honey may have been a prized burst of energy for early foragers. Sweetness is rare in the natural world, and a hive is a treasure chest guarded by stings. Long before sugar existed, honey offered fast and precious energy that could carry a group through long walks and lean days. It came with wax as well, useful for waterproofing, for sealing containers, and for helping a flame to catch. Gathering it was dangerous work. People had to read the flight paths of bees, follow them back to hidden hollows, and approach with smoke, with patience, or with sheer nerve. In parts of southern Africa, ancient rock paintings show scenes of honey gathering, which hints at how memorable and treasured it must have been. Honey also keeps well, so it pairs naturally with the idea of storing food and preserving flavor through hard seasons. A mouthful of it would not have felt like a simple snack. It would have felt like a small miracle. Warm sunlight somehow turned into food. Grinding stones hinted a world of plant foods long before agriculture. When a worn grinding stone turns up at an ancient site, we are looking at the evidence of patient hands working over meals that never came from a hunt. Grinding turns seeds, roots, and tough plant fibers into something easier to digest and easier to cook. It can strip away bitterness, change texture, and help stored food last longer, which matters when the seasons shift. These stones often hold microscopic traces, like tiny grains of plant starch, that reveal exactly what was processed there. That means early humans were not only gathering plants, but transforming them. Grinding also suggests routine, because you do not carry heavy stones far unless a place is visited often, or the reward is truly worth the burden. In a settled camp, the steady sound of grinding may have been as familiar as the crackle of a fire. It is a quieter kind of technology, yet a powerful one, revealing a deep knowledge of the land and the slow beginnings of everything that farming would one day become. Wild grains were gathered and prepared thousands of years before the first fields. Farming did not appear out of nowhere. Long before anyone planted a seed on purpose, people were already collecting wild grains, learning which patches ripened first, and working out how to separate the edible seed from its husk and chaff. That labor takes patience, and it takes tools, like baskets for carrying and stones for grinding. It also takes a fine sense of timing, since harvesting too early wastes the effort and too late loses the seed to wind and to animals. Some sites show grain being used again and again across long spans of time, which suggests that people were building a real relationship with these plants. They may have encouraged the best stands by clearing rival growth, or simply by returning to the same reliable places year after year. Over time, those quiet habits can nudge both plants and people toward domestication, even before anyone intends it. This is the slow, almost invisible beginning of one of the greatest shifts in our whole story. Some stone hand axes were shaped with a striking symmetry and care. A hand axe can be brutally practical, yet many surviving examples look like the work of someone who cared about far more than a cutting edge. The two faces are balanced. The outline is even and pleasing. The work shows patience, planning, and a clear mental image of the finished tool held steadily in mind. That kind of symmetry is not required to chop or to scrape, which raises a quietly fascinating possibility. Perhaps these objects carried social meaning as well. A beautifully made hand axe could signal skill, discipline, and reliability to the whole group. It could be a way to impress a partner, or to earn the respect of elders. Making one also trains the mind, since you must picture the angles, control the force, and adjust after every single strike, learning from each failure how the stone behaves. When you hold a truly symmetrical hand axe, you are holding proof that a sense of beauty and a mastery of craft were already sharing the very same pair of hands. Early humans made glue from plant resin to bind their tools together. A sharp stone edge is impressive, but a sharp edge fixed firmly to a handle is a genuine leap forward. Joining the two requires an adhesive, and that means early humans were quietly doing chemistry with nothing but their senses. Resin has to be gathered, gently warmed, and sometimes mixed with ash or fiber to create a stronger bond. Too brittle, and it snaps. Too soft, and it slides. Getting the recipe right takes experiment and memory. It also takes foresight, because you cannot brew good glue in the middle of a chase. You prepare it well ahead of time, then carry it like a valued supply. A tool with a proper handle changes everything. It extends your reach, adds leverage, and spares the hand from injury. It also reveals a mind working in careful steps. Gather the resin, process it, shape the stone, bind the parts, and wait for it to set. That is a whole chain of thought that you can quite literally hold in your hand. Composite tools combined stone, wood, and binding into a single clever design. When a tool is made of several parts, it becomes far more than the sum of its materials. A wooden shaft can flex, a stone point can pierce, and a binding can hold the whole thing steady under a heavy blow. Combining them creates something that can be repaired rather than thrown away. If the point breaks, you can replace it. If the binding loosens, you can tighten it again. That modular thinking is a quiet form of engineering. It also demands new skills like choosing straight wood, seasoning it so it will not warp, and selecting fibers that hold fast even when wet. Composite tools change how knowledge spreads too, because they are harder to invent alone and usually require patient teaching. A child can learn one part at a time, then slowly grasp how the parts work together. In daily life, such tools make work faster and free up time for other things. Across the long arc of our story, they are a sign that humans were beginning to build systems, not just objects. Twisted fibers reveal that rope is far older than writing. A single twist is a simple action, yet it unlocks a whole world. Two weak strands, wound together, become one strong cord. With cordage, you can bind a spear point, lash together the frame of a shelter, hang food safely away from animals, and carry heavy loads without tearing your hands. Rope also makes traps possible, and a trap can work quietly while you sleep. Fiber almost never survives, which makes its discovery feel like finding a whisper somehow preserved in stone. Sometimes the only evidence is an impression, a pattern left behind in dried clay or pressed into the surface of a tool. Those faint marks prove that people understood structure, tension, and endurance. They knew which plants split into good, strong strands, and when to soak them, and when to let them dry. Cordage also invites creativity, because once you can bind things together, you can begin to build things, and the scale of what you can build grows quickly. Our story is often told in stone, but the soft technologies mattered every bit as much. Nets and snares likely caught far more food than spears ever did. A spear is dramatic, but it depends on being in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. A snare waits patiently. A net surrounds. These quiet tools turn knowledge into a harvest, because you must understand the trails, the burrows, and the daily habits of animals to use them well. You set a snare where a hare already wants to run, and a net where fish already gather in the narrowing of a current. Trapping also spreads the work across the whole day. You can set many snares and return to them later, which makes gathering food steadier and far less dangerous than close-range hunting. It changes who can contribute too, since older people, injured people, and children can all help set and check the traps. Nets and snares are also proof of planning. You need cordage, stakes, knots, and patience, and above all the restraint to build the reward first and receive it only later. That ability to invest effort into the future is one of the clearest signs of a fully modern mind. Tiny stone bladelets reveal precision work done by remarkably steady hands. Some ancient tools are so small that they look as though they belong in a watchmaker's tray. These tiny bladelets were often struck from carefully prepared cores, then shaped into neat, standardized pieces. That level of miniature work is no gimmick. Small blades can be set in a row into wood or bone to make a long cutting edge with many sharp points, like an early version of a multi-tool. They are light to carry, and they can be replaced one at a time as they wear, which makes them wonderfully practical. Producing them takes real control. The maker must strike at just the right angle, with just the right force, again and again, without wasting the precious stone. It also implies planning for repair, since such tools work best when spare parts are already prepared and waiting. These small pieces can look modest in a museum drawer, yet they hint at a sophisticated kind of design, humans turning brittle rock into reliable systems, one careful sliver at a time. A simple throwing tool turned the human arm into a launcher. Picture a spear leaving the hand, and then picture it leaving with an extra snap of speed and reach. That is the gift of the spear thrower. A simple lever that extends the arm and adds force, sending a dart far further than any hand could throw it. With that one change, hunting is transformed. You can strike from a safer distance, and you can face animals that would be terrifying up close. It also rewards skill, since timing and long practice truly matter, and the finest throwers could mean the difference between hunger and abundance. These throwers appear in many parts of the world, and they quietly point to teaching, because you do not invent and spread a tool like this without demonstration, imitation, and patient improvement. It is also a gentle step on the road toward later projectile weapons. Most of all, it shows early humans turning the plain physics of a lever into a matter of survival, extending their reach into a world that had once been out of range. Barbed bone harpoons show careful planning for hunting in the water. A harpoon is no casual invention. It requires choosing the right bone, shaping the backward-facing barbs, and truly understanding how water changes the way things move. A barbed point holds fast when a fish thrashes, which means its maker had already pictured the struggle before it ever began. In some regions, these bone harpoons appear astonishingly early, hinting at a sophistication that sits far from the old stereotype of a simple and brutish life. Hunting in water also demands strategy. You may need to wait at a narrow channel, to work with others to drive the fish, or to travel by raft to reach the best spots. It can even involve fishing by night, using firelight to turn the darkness into an advantage. Harpoons carry a social story as well. Making one takes time, and time is easier to spare when food is shared. A well-made harpoon is both a weapon and a promise, a sign that patient planning can reach into a hidden world beneath the surface of the water. Early humans fished the rivers and coasts, widening their diets far beyond big game. The great hunts capture our imagination, yet fish may well have been the steady backbone of survival. Rivers and shorelines offer protein that arrives on a schedule, often with the reliable turning of the seasons. Early humans learned where fish gather, where currents slow, and where the falling tide reveals pools brimming with life. Fishing also changes who can contribute, because you do not always need the strength to bring down a giant animal. You need knowledge, timing, and simple tools, which means more hands can help feed the group. Living by the coast adds other foods as well, like shellfish and seaweed, which can fill the gaps when hunting fails. Ancient sites preserve fish bones, hooks, and the faint traces of shoreline meals that once happened at dusk beside the water. This flexibility matters because it shows that early humans were never locked into a single menu. They explored new sources of food, and that curiosity helped them spread into varied lands where large game alone could never have sustained them. Tool styles shifted from place to place, like accents you could hold in your hand. Two groups can face very similar challenges and still solve them in different ways. In stone tools, those differences show up in the shape of a point, the manner in which flakes are removed, or the choice of raw material. Over time, these patterns become recognizable. Those who study them can sometimes tell where a tool was made, not because it carries any label, but because it wears a local style. That is why a toolkit can feel almost like a cultural signature. It hints at who learned from whom, and how ideas spread between groups that met only rarely. When a style shifts suddenly, it can signal migration, contact, or a fresh technique that caught on and spread. When a style stays stable across long ages, it can suggest a strong tradition and careful teaching passed down with pride. In a world without writing, stone itself could preserve identity. It could hold a sense of belonging in the very shape of a blade. Volcanic glass can trace human journeys across hundreds of miles. Obsidian is glass born of volcanoes, and it breaks into edges so sharp they can part skin with ease. What makes it almost magical for those who study the past is that each source of obsidian carries its own faint chemical fingerprint. So when a black blade turns up far from any volcano, its home mountain can be identified with real confidence. Suddenly a route appears that no footprints ever preserved. A hunter might have carried that blade during seasonal travel. A visitor might have brought it as a gift. A skilled craftsman might have traded finished blades for food, for shelter, or for friendship. The distance matters because it reveals planning and connection. People were not trapped within tiny circles of land. They moved, they met, and they built relationships that stretched across whole regions. A single glittering shard can become a breadcrumb trail through deep time, quietly showing us just how wide and connected the early human world truly was. Stone blades were exchanged not only as tools, but as social gifts. A sharp blade can cut meat, scrape a hide, carve wood, and shape another tool. But it can also carry a message. In many ancient camps, those who dig find blades made from material that plainly came from somewhere else, which speaks of exchange. An exchange is rarely only about the object itself. To give a blade can signal respect for another group's skill. It can ease the tension after a wary first meeting. It can help arrange the marriage ties that soften future conflict. It can even serve as a kind of promise, since a gift creates a gentle obligation that keeps a relationship alive. Stone is honest too. A finely made blade shows mastery in a way that anyone can recognize, even without a shared language. That is why tools could become symbols. They are useful, portable, and quietly impressive. When early humans traded blades, they were also trading safety, reputation, and connection, passing them one hand to another across long and difficult distances. A single seashell found far inland can reveal a long trade route. Finding a seashell hundreds of miles from any ocean is like hearing waves somewhere in the middle of a desert. It tells you that someone carried it, treasured it, and passed it along. At many early sites, shells appear deep inland, sometimes pierced for stringing on a cord, sometimes worn smooth from long handling. These were not tools for survival. They were chosen objects, which means people already valued beauty, rarity, or meaning. A shell can travel in a pocket, upon a necklace, or within a bundle of gifts offered to strangers. Each handing on builds a little trust, and trust builds networks. Those networks can carry far more than ornaments. They can carry news of water sources, of safe routes, and of friendly groups waiting somewhere ahead. In a world without maps, trade was also a form of communication. A small shell, resting quietly in the palm, is proof that early humans were already connected across wide and complicated landscapes. A good shelter was a technology in itself, shaped by wind and weather. A shelter is far more than a place to sleep. It is a careful answer to rain, cold, heat, insects, and predators. Early humans most likely built with whatever the land offered, using branches, hides, grasses, and stones. In windy country, a low profile and weighted edges mattered. In wet regions, drainage and a raised sleeping area mattered. In the cold, it was insulation and a sheltered entrance that made the difference between comfort and misery. The best shelters also saved calories, since a body kept warm needs less food, which makes shelter a form of energy management and not only comfort. Some sites still hold rings of stone that once pinned down hides, or the holes where posts once stood. Even when the structure itself is long gone, the pattern remains. A shelter also shapes social life, creating a shared interior where children learn routines and where tools rest ready for the next day. To build a shelter was, in a quiet way, to build stability. Neanderthals and early modern humans met, and they had children together. Their worlds overlapped across Western Asia and Europe during long, cold, demanding ages. Rather than a clean handoff from one kind of human to another, the evidence shows real contact, close enough to leave a lasting mark in our genes. Many people whose roots lie outside Africa still carry small amounts of Neanderthal inheritance, which means that real families once formed across that ancient boundary. Some of what was passed down is linked to the immune system, which may have helped newcomers cope with unfamiliar local diseases. Other inherited pieces are tied to health risks we still navigate today. A reminder that what helps in one world can carry a cost in another. The picture that emerges is deeply human. Groups met at river crossings and beneath rock shelters. They watched one another, weighed each other's intentions, and sometimes chose connection over fear. Our species did not travel through prehistory alone. We traveled through a whole neighborhood of other kinds of humans. A single finger bone revealed an entire lost kind of human. In a cave in Siberia, a small fragment of bone looked utterly ordinary until its genetic code was read. That code matched neither the Neanderthals nor ourselves. It pointed instead to a distinct kind of human, now called the Denisovans, a people first known as a genome long before we had any real face for them. Later discoveries, including a few teeth and other fragments, left them nearly as mysterious as before, yet their genetic legacy still speaks loudly through the living. People across parts of Asia and the islands of the Pacific carry Denisovan inheritance, which means these people once ranged far beyond that single Siberian cave. One striking example involves the thin air of high mountains, where a Denisovan gift appears to help certain populations thrive. It is astonishing that a vanished people can be traced through the blood of the living. A whole branch of humanity was hiding in plain sight, waiting quietly inside a fragment of finger bone. Our immune systems still carry the echoes of ancient meetings between peoples. When our ancestors moved into new lands, they met unfamiliar microbes, and survival often favored bodies that could respond quickly and flexibly. Some of the immune variations we carry today can be traced to ancient mixing with other human lineages, and those fragments endured because they helped in particular times and places. That does not mean they always help us now. A defense that once saved lives can misfire in a modern world of different diseases, different diets, and dense crowded living. What makes this so quietly captivating is the sheer reach of time involved. A brief chapter of contact, tens of thousands of years ago, can still shape how your body recognizes a threat at the level of a single cell. Your immune system is not only a response to your own world, it is also a kind of memory bank of older worlds, filled with the echoes of ancient exposure, ancient survival, and ancient chance, all carried quietly forward in you. High-altitude survival in the mountains traces back to a vanished people. Living high in the mountains challenges the body, because thin air makes every breath less efficient. and many people develop serious trouble at great heights. Yet some highland populations often thrive with far fewer of those risks. Genetic study has linked a key variation, one involved in how the body handles oxygen, to ancestry connected with the Denisovans, that ancient people known mostly through their DNA. The story is remarkable. A trait that may have arisen in one population long ago was passed into another through interbreeding, then strongly favored in the harsh environment of the high plateau. It is evolution as a kind of relay race, where one group carries a helpful gift and hands it to another at just the right moment in history. It also gently changes how we imagine progress. Adaptation is not always invented fresh from nothing. Sometimes it is borrowed. In the thin mountain air, a lost human lineage may still be helping people breathe, day after quiet day. Differences in skin and hair are maps of sunlight and survival. As humans spread across the latitudes, sunlight became a powerful force shaping the body. In regions of intense sun, richer pigment helps protect the skin from damage, while in places of weaker sun, lighter pigment can help the body produce the vitamin it needs for healthy bones. Hair plays its own quiet roles beyond appearance, helping to shield the scalp, manage heat, and shape the way sweat cools the skin. These traits did not change because anyone wished for variety. They shifted because different environments quietly reward different balances. What is most interesting is how migration keeps remixing these adaptations. People move, cultures meet, and traits that arose in one setting appear in another, blended again and again by later journeys. Human variation is not a set of tidy separate boxes. It is a flowing mosaic, shaped by ancient climates and then reshaped by long travel. Every shade and every strand carries within it a long history of sunlight, weather, and survival. The ability to digest milk evolved late, proving humans kept changing after farming. For most mammals, the ability to digest the sugar in milk fades soon after infancy, and early humans were most likely the same. Then herding and dairying created a new source of food, one that could remain available even when crops failed. In some populations, a genetic change that kept this ability alive into adulthood spread widely because it offered a real advantage, providing calories, protein, and even water in hard and thirsty times. What makes this so striking is what it says about our story. Human evolution did not stop at the dawn of agriculture. Culture created new pressures, and our biology answered. Different regions followed different paths, which is why this tolerance is common in some places and rare in others. It is a perfect example of custom and biology working together, step by patient step. A change in how people chose to live slowly reshaped what their bodies could handle, and that change is still visible today in an ordinary glass of milk. The first humans crossed open water to reach Australia astonishingly early. Reaching the ancient landmass that once joined Australia and New Guinea required water crossings. Even when the seas ran low, that means early people had to plan, to build, and to trust something that could float. They also had to navigate a broken chain of islands where the land is scattered like stepping stones, separated by deep and difficult channels. This was no accidental drift on a floating log. It most likely involved repeated voyages, a real knowledge of the currents, and the courage to carry families and supplies out into the unknown. Once they arrived, people adapted to new animals, new plants, and unfamiliar seasons, spreading in time across a vast continent. The timing still surprises many, because it places seafaring deep in prehistory, long before metal tools or written maps existed. It shows what early humans were truly capable of when curiosity and necessity came together. To them, the ocean was not a wall, it was a road. Humans reached the frozen Arctic through clever clothing, fuel, and planning. Moving into the far north meant facing long winters, scarce plant food, and a cold that punishes every mistake. Survival there took more than bravery. It required insulation that stayed warm even when wet, and a steady strategy for fire and light in places where wood was hard to find. People turned to bone, to fat, and to clever engineering. Animal skins could be layered, blubber and oil could be burned for fuel, and snow itself could be shaped into a shield against the wind. Hunting had to change. since the great animals of cold lands can be dangerous and appear only in their seasons, so a deep knowledge of ice, weather, and migration became as vital as any strength. The Arctic also tested community. Supplies had to be shared, children and elders had to be protected, and a single storm could trap a group for days. To live in such a place shows how flexible humans had become. They did not merely endure the extreme, they learned to make it a home. The first Americans arrived by routes that may well have hugged the coast. For a long time, many pictured a single inland path through a corridor between great ice sheets. Today, many who study the question also consider the coast, where the shoreline can offer reliable food and easier travel. Kelp forests, shellfish beds, and runs of fish can support movement in a way that a barren interior of ice never could. The difficulty is that those ancient coastlines now lie underwater, so the evidence is genuinely hard to find. Even so, both archaeology and genetics point toward complex timing and more than one pathway. People may have traveled in small groups, pausing at coves, river mouths, and quiet beaches where fresh water met the sea. Simple boats could have carried them across inlets and between islands. A coastal route changes the whole mood of the journey. It becomes a story of tides and windows and navigation by landmark. It reminds us that the peopling of the Americas may have been as much a triumph of the sea as of the land. During the Ice Ages, lower seas revealed land that now lies drowned. When the Ice Ages locked vast amounts of water into glaciers, the seas fell, sometimes by more than the height of many houses stacked together, that reshaped every coastline and opened land bridges, including the wide plain that once joined Siberia to Alaska. It also exposed broad coastal lowlands where people could live, hunt, and travel for thousands of years. Then the climate warmed, the ice melted, and the ocean rose again, slowly swallowing those landscapes whole. Old campsites, hearths, and even footprints may now rest beneath the waves, out of sight and often far out of reach. This changes how we read the past. The map we use today is not the map the first humans knew. Many of their migration routes may follow shorelines that are now submerged, and many of their richest homes may be gone entirely. The ocean is not only water, it is also a moving archive that quietly hides some of the earliest chapters of human life. Many islands today were once hilltops rising above vast coastal plains. When the sea rises, the highest ground becomes an island, and the low ground simply disappears. That means some islands are really the drowned peaks of hills, with a whole missing world spread out beneath the water around them. For early humans, those vanished plains could have been wide and fertile and full of game, threaded by rivers that are now underwater channels. Travel between places could have been far easier too. What looks like an isolated island today might once have been joined to the mainland by dry land, or parted from it by only a narrow crossing rather than open sea. This matters for the stories we tell about migration, because it can explain how people and animals reached places that seem so hard to access now. It also changes the very feeling of prehistory. Human journeys did not unfold upon a fixed and steady stage. The stage itself was shifting, and the coastlines wandered like slow, living borders. Genetic clocks help estimate ancient migrations, even when bones are scarce. Genes change at a slow and uneven pace, yet across long spans of time they can still act something like a clock. By comparing the small differences between populations, researchers can estimate when groups likely split apart from a shared ancestral pool. That helps enormously in places where fossils are rare, where damp air destroys bone, or where rising coastlines have swallowed the ancient camps. It also lets us test competing stories. If a migration happened early, the genetic distance should usually run deeper, and if it happened late, the split should look younger. The clock is never perfect, so it is always checked against archaeology, geology, and the record of ancient climate. When all those lines of evidence point the same way, the past comes gently into focus. What they reveal is quietly moving. Migrations were rarely single marches. They were pulses, pauses, and returns, carried by families who never knew that they were shaping the ancestry of the whole world. Ancient DNA can reveal lost relatives, deep ancestry, and sudden crashes. When genetic material survives in old bone or tooth, it can do something astonishing. It can identify family ties within an ancient burial ground, showing whether two people were siblings, parent and child, or distant cousins. It can reveal mixtures of ancestry that mark the moments when different groups met and blended their lives. Sometimes it even captures sudden loss, because a population crash can leave a genetic signature, a narrowing of variety that echoes down through the later generations, that can point to famine, to disease, to the stress of a changing climate, or to displacement. Ancient DNA can also surprise us by exposing hidden continuity, since a place may look empty in its scattered artifacts while the genes quietly show that people stayed and adapted. There are limits, of course. This kind of evidence does not explain why people did what they did, and it does not survive everywhere. Yet when it works, it turns scattered bones into connected lives and lets long silent communities speak again. A single well-preserved skeleton can reshape the story of an entire region. Most of prehistory is built from fragments, and then one discovery redraws the whole outline. A well-preserved skeleton can carry a date, a signal of its owner's diet, and a genetic profile all within one body. It can confirm that humans were present earlier than anyone expected, or that they arrived later than local legend suggested. It can reveal a life spent on the move through the chemical traces locked in the teeth, which can point to a childhood spent somewhere far away. It can even hint at custom and belief through healed injuries, unusual burial positions, or the marks of hard labor. That is why a single find can trigger new digs and long debates. It forces scholars to rewrite timelines and to reconsider the roots of migration. It can also restore complexity to a place that once seemed simple, revealing not a dead end but a crossroads. Sometimes the past waits quietly in one hidden grave until the very moment it is ready to be found. Some early peoples vanished, leaving only the faintest genetic echo. Human history holds chapters that simply ended. Some populations thrived for thousands of years and then disappeared as the climate shifted, as resources moved, or as new groups arrived. In a few cases, their story lingers on as a thin genetic thread inside later peoples, like a whisper carried forward through intermarriage. In others, the trace is gone entirely, leaving only tools, hearths, and questions. To vanish did not always mean disaster. A group could be gently absorbed into a larger network until its distinct identity faded, or it could simply move away, leaving a region empty for a time. These possibilities are hard to tell apart, which is why the mystery keeps its power. It reminds us that survival was never guaranteed. Whole ways of life could end without leaving a single monument behind. And yet, even when the names are lost, the evidence of their existence still matters, for it widens our sense of how many human stories have quietly unfolded and ended across the ages. Genetic bottlenecks reveal just how fragile survival once was. A bottleneck happens when a population shrinks to a very small size and only later grows again. In our genes, it can appear as a narrowing of variety, a sign that many lineages were lost along the way. For early humans, these bottlenecks hint at times when survival hung by a thread. Swings of climate could shrink the habitable land, dry up the water, or scatter the animals people relied on. A few valleys or stretches of coast might remain livable while everything around them turned harsh, and in those refuges, small groups endured, their descendants later spreading out again once conditions improved. That pattern makes prehistory feel less like a steady climb, and more like a series of narrow bridges crossed in the dark. It also helps explain why certain traits became common, since when numbers are low, sheer chance plays a larger role in what gets passed on. Bottlenecks are humbling. They suggest that our species was resilient, and yet repeatedly close to being erased. Ice Age droughts may have pulled humans toward the coasts and rivers. During colder phases, the patterns of rainfall could shift, and the interior of continents could turn dry and unpredictable. In such times, water itself becomes a compass. Rivers, lakes, and coastlines offer steady resources, and they carve out natural corridors that are far easier to follow than open desert. The coast adds another gift, since the tides and the rich life of the shore can provide food across many seasons, even when the inland game grows scarce. This does not mean that a life by the water was ever easy. Storms, cold winds, and competition with other groups could all be fierce. Yet the pull of reliable drinking water and gatherable food would have been hard to resist. Over many generations, this quiet tug toward the waterways could shape migration routes, settlement, and even the web of social ties, since river valleys bring travelers into contact again and again. Perhaps the most important lines on the ancient map were not roads at all. They were blue. One vast eruption is debated as a possible test of humanity's endurance. Roughly 74,000 years ago, an enormous volcanic eruption in what is now Indonesia spread ash across wide reaches of the world. Some researchers have argued that the aftermath could have cooled the climate and strained whole ecosystems, placing early human populations under severe pressure. Others question just how global and how devastating the effects truly were, especially across Africa. That very debate is part of what makes the topic so gripping. It is a scientific detective story, weaving together layers of ash, clues from the climate, the record of stone tools, and the evidence hidden in our genes. If the eruption caused a major bottleneck, we might expect to see a sharp drop in variety around that time. And if it did not, we should see more continuity in how people lived. Either way, it points to a deep truth about early life. Nature could rewrite the rules overnight. A sky darkened by ash would not be an abstraction. It would be hunger, cold, and difficult choices lived day by day. Shifting climate opened and closed green corridors across the Sahara. The Sahara did not always look the way it does now. Over long, slow cycles, changes in the Earth's path and in the strength of the rains could transform parts of North Africa entirely. Dry desert could become grassland dotted with lakes and rivers, and those greener phases would act like corridors, letting people and animals move through country that is nearly impassable today. Then the climate could swing back, the water would retreat, the plants would thin, and the corridor would close again. This slow opening and closing matters because it can explain the pulses of migration between different parts of Africa and beyond. It also helps explain why some archaeological records appear in bursts, as people expanded when conditions allowed and withdrew when the land hardened. Imagine what that would feel like in a life. A road your grandparents once walked could become a deadly expanse within a few generations. For the first humans, geography was never fixed. It breathed. The Sahara was once alive with lakes, fish, and open grassland. It is hard to picture fish where dunes now stretch to the horizon, and yet the evidence shows that parts of the Sahara once held great lakes and thriving wetlands. Ancient shorelines, the sediments of vanished lakes, and scattered fossils all point to ages when the rains were far more generous. People could live in places that are utterly uninhabitable now, fishing, hunting, and gathering along the water's edge. The wetlands would have drawn animals as well, creating rich hunting grounds and predictable seasonal rhythms. This green Sahara reframes how we imagine early travel, since crossing North Africa in a wet phase would have felt more like moving through a wide savanna than braving a desert. It reframes memory too, because communities would have held stories tied to water landscapes that later vanished, leaving only rock and sand. When the climate shifted again, those same people might have followed the retreating lakes, carrying their traditions with them. Today's harshest places can hide gentler worlds within their past. Rock art records animals that once lived in places now barren. On stone walls across parts of the Sahara, ancient artists painted and carved animals that plainly do not belong there now. You can find cattle, giraffes, and other creatures that need real water and green growth to survive. These images are far more than decoration. They are a kind of ecological record, drawn by people observing the daily life around them. They can hint at what was hunted, what was herded, and what was feared, and they reveal what mattered enough to be worth depicting. When the climate dried, the animals disappeared, and so did the communities that had depended on those living landscapes. The art remained behind, like a message left for a future desert. It is haunting in the best possible way. A carved giraffe on a sun-baked rock, is proof that a greener world once existed where sand now rules. It also proves that early humans were witnesses who recorded change, and not merely its silent victims. Humans once shared the earth with giant mammals now long gone. Imagine stepping into a land where the largest animals are not in a zoo or a storybook, but right there, just beyond the next ridge. In the world of the Ice Ages, people lived alongside mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, and other great beasts that could dwarf almost anything most of us have ever seen. These animals shaped travel routes and daily decisions. A herd could mean food, tools, and warm hides, and yet it could also mean sudden danger if the wind shifted and a charging animal decided that you were the threat. Even their bones reshaped the landscape, as tusks and ribs became the raw material for shelters, windbreaks, and storage frames. Living among giants also stretched the imagination. It invited bigger stories, deeper fears, and greater ambitions. When we speak of the first humans, we are also speaking of a world filled with creatures that belong to a different and grander scale of the earth. Great beasts like mammoths and giant sloths faced new pressure from people. When humans entered new lands, they did not arrive as passive onlookers. They came as clever predators, armed with fire, teamwork, and tools that kept improving across the generations. For very large animals, even small changes in mortality can matter deeply, because slow breeders cannot recover quickly. A mammoth does not replace itself in a hurry, and a giant sloth cannot rebound like a hare. Hunting was not the only pressure either. People also changed the land through burning, through competition, and through disturbance near the precious water sources. None of this required a single dramatic event. It could be a long, quiet squeeze, season after season, until the great populations slowly thinned. There is a human side to this story as well. To bring down a huge animal could feed many mouths and build real standing within the group. Yet it carried terrible risk, since one wrong step could mean injury or death. These encounters were not simply meals. They were turning points that reshaped both human life and the fate of the animals. The great extinctions varied by continent, and their causes still spark debate. The vast wave of loss among the largest animals did not unfold as one single global moment. It played out differently across the continents, with different timings and different patterns. In some places, the great animals declined soon after humans arrived, while in others, the extinctions came late or struck only certain species, with some holding on far longer than expected. That very unevenness fuels the debate. The climate was shifting at the end of the last ice age, and changing rainfall and vegetation constrain large animals even without any hunters at all. At the same time, human hunting and the reshaping of habitats can be powerful forces, especially against slow-breeding creatures. Many now look to combined pressures, where climate weakens a population and human impact pushes it past a tipping point. What makes this so compelling is that it is not only about the past. It is a lesson in how whole ecosystems respond to rapid change, and it is a mirror held gently up to us. Dogs most likely joined humans before the first farms, forming our oldest partnership. Long before grain fields and barns, humans and wolves began a relationship that would transform them both. The earliest steps were surely never planned. Some wolves were simply less fearful, and they learned that a human camp meant scraps, warmth, and fewer rival predators nearby. Humans gained something in return, for a wolf with sharp senses can warn of danger, help track game, and clean away the waste that might otherwise draw scavengers. Over time, the camp-friendly wolves were the ones most likely to survive near people, and their pups inherited that same calmer temper. That is the quiet beginning of domestication, and the beginning of a partnership built on trust, routine, and shared space. Dogs became far more than tools. They became companions, protectors, and true members of the group. This bond is so ancient that it sits near the very roots of our social world. A person and a dog beside a fire is not a modern scene at all. It is old beyond easy imagining. Domestication reshaped both species, changing behavior and even faces. Once dogs became part of human life, evolution began working in two directions at once. Dogs changed as the calmer individuals thrived beside people, and over the generations, selection favored gentler traits, closer attention to human cues, and a real willingness to cooperate. Physical changes followed, because behavior and development are quietly linked, and so many domesticated animals show shifts in their coats, their ears, and the structure of their faces, and dogs are no exception. Humans changed too, though in subtler ways. Living alongside animals that could alert, track, and guard may have altered how groups traveled and how they managed danger through the night. It surely reshaped emotion as well, since bonding with another species strengthens empathy and teaches a new kind of communication, one built on gesture, tone, and shared routine. Domestication is not only a scientific process, it is a relationship that quietly rewired daily life. The dog is not merely an animal in our story. It is something closer to a co-author. The oldest known burials hint at grief, care, and lasting bonds. A burial is far more than a body laid in the ground. It is a decision, and decisions leave clues about minds and relationships. At some early sites, the dead appear to have been placed with real intention, sometimes in pits, sometimes curled as if in sleep, sometimes with colored earth or small objects nearby. Even where the details are debated, the pattern suggests that groups paused their usual urgent routines to face a loss. That pause cost time and energy, so it likely meant something real. It could have been respect for a person, or before the mystery of death, or a way to hold a community together in the wake of grief. Whatever the reason, it shows that humans were doing far more than surviving from meal to meal. When we picture early people, it is easy to imagine only hunger and danger. Burials gently insist on a different picture. They show us tenderness and memory living quietly inside a harsh world. Some injured people survived for years, which means others cared for them. Bones can carry the quiet evidence of compassion. Those who study the past have found individuals who lived with serious injuries or wearing conditions. People who survived long enough for the damage to heal and remodel, a broken leg that mended, an arm that reshaped around an old wound, teeth worn down to what must have been real pain, all point to problems that would make hunting and gathering terribly hard. Survival in such cases implies help. Someone shared food, someone offered protection, someone slowed the group's pace to let another keep up. Care like this does not require any modern medicine. It begins with patience, with carrying, with guarding, and with bringing water. It also involves a genuine choice, since a group under pressure could always abandon anyone who slowed it down. The fact that so many were not abandoned is deeply powerful. It means early humans were investing in one another, not only for immediate gain, but because relationships truly mattered. The unusual length of human childhood demanded cooperation. Human infants arrive helpless, and they stay dependent far longer than the young of almost any other animal. That long childhood shapes everything. It pushes adults toward cooperation, because one person alone can barely provide food, protection, and constant attention all at once. It also creates precious time for learning, since young minds can absorb skills, stories, and social rules across many patient years. In early human groups, this most likely meant shared care of the children. Older siblings, aunts and uncles, and trusted friends could all play a part, since extra eyes and hands raise the odds of survival. A long childhood also encourages stable bonds, because relationships become the scaffolding around a growing child. This is not merely a sweet idea. It may be one of the true engines of our success. A long childhood makes a species more vulnerable, and yet it also makes it wonderfully adaptable. It gives humans the time to master tools, land, and language, and it gives culture room to gather across the generations. Grandparents may have boosted survival by sharing food and hard-won knowledge. Humans are unusual, because many people live long after they stop having children of their own. That long later life is no accident in the story of evolution. One idea holds that older adults improved the survival of their grandchildren, both by helping to feed them and by freeing two parents to gather and to hunt. A grandparent can also be a library with a heartbeat. They remember the droughts, the migrations, and which plants or which places once saved lives when times were desperate. They can teach the skills of the tool and warn of the predator without a child having to risk a first and fatal mistake. In small groups, that wisdom could be the difference between a narrow escape and a tragedy. It changes how we picture early life as well. It was not only young adults in constant motion, it was communities of many ages, where the old carried real value. When knowledge and care flow from old to young, a group becomes far more resilient. Teeth quietly record childhood stress, diet, and the passing seasons. Teeth are like time capsules because they form in layers and then they endure. A hard season in childhood can leave a faint line in the enamel, a record of illness or of hunger. Microscopic wear can show whether someone ate gritty plants, tough meat, or softer cooked food. Chemical traces locked in the tooth can even hint at where a person grew up, since the local water and stone leave a signature within the body. That means a single tooth can tell a story that bones alone would miss. It can suggest the age of weaning, which links in turn to family care and the spacing of births. It can reveal exposure to the smoke of the hearth, touching everyday life rather than only dramatic events. In the study of the past, teeth are not merely remains, they are biographies. They let us meet a child who lived long ago, and they let us gently ask what that child once tasted, suffered, and survived. Early humans most likely lived in small bands with flexible roles and shifting alliances. Rather than crowded settlements, most early life probably unfolded in small bands that could move on when the resources shifted. These groups were not rigid ladders of rank. They had to be adaptable, since a storm, an injury, or a failed hunt could change every priority overnight. Roles could bend with age, skill, and season, so that one person might be a hunter in summer and a maker of tools in winter, while another might be a healer, a storyteller, or simply the best at finding water. Bands also needed allies, because a friendly neighboring group can mean shared news, marriage ties, and support in a crisis. That creates a wider social world reaching far beyond any single camp, and it creates politics in the simplest sense, as people remember favors and slights and balance cooperation against caution. To live in a band means your survival depends on relationships you must maintain without any written contract. It is social intelligence under real pressure, and it may be one of the strongest forces that shaped the human mind. Sharing food turned raw luck into the shared survival of the whole group. Hunting and gathering can be wildly unpredictable. One person may return with plenty while another returns empty-handed, and neither result is a fair measure of effort. Sharing food turns that randomness into something more stable. It spreads calories across the group, which helps children grow, helps the injured heal, and helps everyone avoid desperate choices. Sharing also builds reputation, since a generous hunter earns trust, and that trust becomes support in return when the hunter has a bad week of his own. This is not charity in the modern sense. It is a strategy that makes a small community resilient. It changes the emotional texture of life as well, turning meals into social events where stories are told and plans are made. Rules quietly emerge, even without writing, about who receives what and why, and those rules can be argued, negotiated, and enforced through approval or through shame. In a band, food is never only nourishment. When people share, they are weaving a safety net out of habit and memory. Gossip may have enforced fairness long before there were any written laws. In a small group, everyone notices everything: who shares and who hoards, who boasts and who keeps a promise. That constant attention can become a powerful social tool. To talk about another's behavior is a way to warn others, to reward good partners, and to press the selfish toward change. You do not need a courtroom when reputation travels faster than footsteps. Gossip also spreads practical knowledge, like who knows the finest source of stone, or who stays calm in a moment of danger. It helps a band coordinate without any formal titles, and it can even prevent violence, since the weight of shared opinion can settle a dispute before it hardens into a fight. Of course, it can be cruel, and it can punish the wrong person, and that risk is part of what makes it feel so believably human. Gossip is a genuine human force, because it is messy, emotional, and effective. In the deep past, it may have worked like an invisible code of law, shaped by the voices gathered around a fire. Gatherings could link distant groups, spreading partners, news, and tools. When bands live apart for much of the year, the times they meet matter enormously. A gathering can renew old friendships, ease tensions, and forge new bonds that keep travel safer for everyone. It can solve practical problems too. Partners can be found, which strengthens the ties between groups and keeps a small population healthy. News can spread about migrating herds, about dangerous rivals, or about a waterhole that has finally run dry. Skills can be shared as well, since seeing a new technique in person is far more convincing than merely hearing of it. Ritual gives these meetings a shape. Songs, dances, shared meals, and repeated traditions can make near strangers feel like part of one wider world, turning a risky encounter into something expected and meaningful. Some ancient sites even show signs of use by many people at once, hinting at gatherings larger than any single band. For the first humans, such a meeting may have been the closest thing to a festival, a market, and a family reunion, all held at once. Laughter and play are ancient social tools, not modern luxuries. When life is harsh, it is easy to imagine people as grim and joyless. Yet laughter itself can be a survival skill. It eases the tension after a fright. It mends small conflicts before they can split a group apart. It signals safety, since creatures rarely laugh when they feel an immediate threat. Play does something similar. It lets the young practice movement, strength, and social negotiation without any deadly stakes. A mock chase teaches quick turns. A friendly wrestle teaches limits and trust. And even teasing can gently test the edges of a friendship, revealing who is sensitive, who is brave, and who might need support. Laughter also builds belonging, for when a group laughs together, it shares a moment that outsiders cannot fully enter, and that quietly strengthens the bonds between them. This matters because early humans depended on cooperation every single day. Food, shelter, and the care of children all ran on trust. Laughter and play help build that trust in a way that no speech ever could. Playful learning may have trained young minds for complex cooperation. Human childhood is long, and that long stretch of years needs filling. Play is one of the wisest ways that nature fills it. Through games, children rehearse the skills of adults in small and safe pieces. They practice taking turns, reading expressions, and predicting what another person will do next. And those are the very same mental skills needed for a coordinated hunt, for fair sharing, and for settling a quarrel. Play also allows for safe failure. A child can misjudge a distance in a game and learn from it, without the cost of a real fall onto stone or a real meeting with a dangerous animal. Many games surely involved imitation, as children copied the gestures of tool-making with sticks, copied the routines of gathering, and copied the sounds of the adults deep in conversation. That imitation becomes culture, passed on without any formal lesson. The result is a mind trained for teamwork. Play is not wasted time at all. It is a long and gentle rehearsal for survival in a deeply social species. Early humans feared great predators, and yet they hunted the largest animals of all. To live in the early landscapes was to share them with teeth and claws. Big cats, hyenas, and other hunters could steal food, stalk the children, or fall upon the weak, and so fear was entirely reasonable. And yet humans also turned their tools upon enormous prey, sometimes animals that could kill with a single kick or charge. That choice reveals something striking. Humans were willing to accept danger in exchange for a reward, and they learned to manage that danger with planning rather than with brute strength. They could choose ground where escape routes lay open. They could pick the moment when an animal was weakened by age, injury, or difficult terrain. They could rely on teamwork, so that a single mistake need not end the hunt. This tension between fear and boldness shaped human behavior, encouraging alertness, communication, and a courage that was shared rather than lonely. Early humans did not master the world by being fearless. They did it by being afraid and acting anyway, with a plan. Wounds on ancient bones reveal close and dangerous contact with prey. Some ancient animal bones carry marks that look like punctures, and even embedded stone points, which suggests that spears met flesh at close range. That matters, because it implies hunts where humans approached animals that could fight back with terrible force. A spear thrown from a distance is one thing, a spear driven home up close is another, and it demands real coordination, since the hunters must position themselves to avoid a sudden turn or a stampede. It demands commitment, too, because once you are close, any hesitation becomes costly. These wounds can also hint at repeated encounters, since a single site may hold several animals bearing similar injuries, which points to a practiced method rather than a lucky accident. The remains are silent, and yet they speak of adrenaline, of shouting, and of the moment when a group decides together to step forward. They speak of skill as well, for a well-placed strike requires knowing anatomy, timing, and how a frightened animal truly moves. Some hunts relied on careful planning and traps, not only on bravery. In the moment, bravery is loud, but planning is often quieter and far more powerful. Traps and drives can turn a difficult hunt into a controlled sequence of events. People could guide animals toward a cliff, a narrow pass, or an enclosure where escape was suddenly limited. They could dig pits, build barriers, or use fire and noise to shape the movement of a herd. These methods rely on understanding behavior, for you must know how an animal flees, where it hesitates, and what it will simply refuse to cross. They rely on cooperation too, since many hands are needed to build, to wait in position, and to act in just the right order. Planning changes the balance of danger, spreading the risk across time so that fewer moments leave a single person standing alone. It also creates surplus when it works, since a successful drive can yield far more than a single spear. This kind of hunting shows the human mind reaching forward in time. The truest weapon is the plan. A ring of fire could protect a camp, carving a circle of safety from the night. In the darkness, a small flame can feel like a solid wall. Many animals hesitate at the edge of fire, especially when it is paired with human voices and movement, and that makes a hearth into something more than a place to cook. It becomes a defense. A ring of light also changes the quality of sleep, since people can rest more deeply when the edges of the camp are visible, and when someone can tend the flame through the night. Fire signals to other humans as well, which can be a comfort or a risk depending on who is near, and managing that risk becomes part of the skill. You need fuel kept ready, you need embers coaxed alive through wind and rain, you need rules about children and sparks. Over time, those habits harden into tradition, and tradition becomes safety. The idea is simple and yet profound. With fire, humans could claim a patch of darkness and make it their own. The night did not vanish, but it took a step back. Sleeping in a group reduced the risk from big cats and other night dangers. Night is when a small mistake becomes terribly expensive. A lone sleeper is quiet, easy to stalk, and slow to wake. A group changes that arithmetic entirely. More ears catch the snap of a distant twig, and more eyes notice a shadow that moves in the wrong way. If danger draws close, several adults can shout, throw stones, and rush forward together, which is far more frightening to a predator than one person rising alone in a panic. Sleeping in a group also lets people take turns keeping watch, so that someone stays alert while the others truly recover. And that recovery matters, because exhaustion makes hunters careless, and makes children harder to guard. Even the layout of a camp can become a strategy, with the most vulnerable resting toward the center and the strong and the tools set at the edges. Across the generations, this would shape habits, stories, and quiet rules about where you lie down. Safety was never a wall. It was a circle of bodies choosing to stay close. Tiny enemies like parasites quietly shaped behavior, from grooming to camp hygiene. It is easy to fix our attention on dramatic threats like storms and predators, and yet the smallest enemies may have been the most constant. Lice, ticks, fleas, and the worms of the gut can drain a person's energy, spread disease, and make sleep a misery. Over time, that pressure can shape the ordinary routines of a day. Grooming becomes more than comfort. It becomes prevention and care, a way of tending one another. Camps need clever habits too. Waste must be placed away from where people live, water sources must be protected, and bedding must be aired or replaced. Smoke from the fire can help, and so can choosing a breezy ridge where insects struggle to gather. Even clothing brings new challenges, since fabric can shelter pests unless it is cleaned and dried. Because one person's hygiene affects everyone nearby, health quietly becomes a social practice. The smallest of organisms can steer the evolution of our habits, and those habits can be the very difference between thriving and fading away. Cave art shows minds like our own reaching back at least 40,000 years. When you stand before the ancient paintings, the real shock is not their age, it is their familiarity. The artists used charcoal, colored earth, and careful shading to suggest volume, motion, and even the personality of the animals. Some caves hold layered images made over long stretches of time, which hints at return visits and shared meaning across the generations. Hand outlines feel especially direct, where a person pressed a palm to the stone and blew pigment around it, leaving a silhouette like a signature across the millennia. Many of these sites are hard to reach, hidden deep in the darkness, which suggests real intention rather than idle marking. The art appears across wide regions, from Europe to Southeast Asia, which points to symbolic thought traveling right along with people. These images do not prove that life was easy, they prove that imagination survived alongside hunger, cold, and fear. Even then, humans made time for beauty, for memory, and for meaning. Hand outlines on cave walls are direct human signatures across time. A hand stencil is one of the most personal marks the past can leave. Someone pressed a palm flat to the stone, then blew pigment around it, and the silhouette stayed behind long after every name was forgotten. It is not an abstract symbol. It is a real hand, with real finger lengths, sometimes missing a tip, sometimes showing a bent and crooked joint. In some caves, you can see many of these outlines gathered together, which feels like a meeting that simply wished to be remembered. The act itself required planning, for the pigment had to be carried, a light had to be tended, and the right wall had to be chosen with care. Some of these outlines appear deep inside caves, where daylight never reaches, which makes the choice feel intentional rather than casual. When you look at one, you are not only seeing art, you are meeting a person who once stood in that exact place and quietly decided to say, "I was here." Some cave paintings used perspective, shading, and a real sense of motion. Many cave paintings are far more than simple outlines. They show animals with bellies rounded by shading, with legs angled to suggest a gallop, and with overlapping forms that feel like a whole herd on the move. Some artists even used the natural bulges and curves of the rock itself as part of the image, so that a bison's shoulder seems to rise straight out of the stone. This is a sophisticated way of seeing, for it treats the wall as a partner rather than a blank surface. Light mattered as well. Under the flicker of a torch, a painted animal could seem to shift and breathe as the shadows moved across it, which may have made the image feel alive during a story or a rite. The skill also implies long practice, since confident lines usually come from repetition, which raises a lovely question. Did certain people become known as the artists of the group? However it happened, these painters were not drawing like children. They were translating the living world with control, observation, and ambition. Pigments were carefully engineered with binders, a chemistry without any textbook. Color upon stone is not merely crushed rock. To last, a pigment often needs a binder, something that helps it stick and spread across the surface. Early humans could mix colored earth with animal fat, plant oil, or water, depending on what was at hand and what effect they wanted. Some blends go on thick and opaque, while others create a thin wash that stains the stone. Making these mixtures takes real trial and error, since too much liquid runs and drips while too little crumbles into dust. It also takes storage and transport, because the pigment must be carried deep into caves or across open country. This is hands-on chemistry, learned entirely through observation. Heat changes the properties of the color, grinding changes its texture, and mixing changes how long it will endure. The most fascinating part is the mindset behind it. Someone noticed that one recipe worked better than another, then remembered it, shared it, and refined it further. That is the very heartbeat of science, alive long before any laboratory existed. The earliest art was not only in caves, but in carvings and small beads. The walls of caves take the spotlight, and yet portable art may have mattered just as much. A carved piece of bone, a shaped pendant, or a string of beads can travel with you, which matters greatly for people always on the move. These objects can carry social roles as well. A bead can mark belonging, a carving can hold a story, a pendant can be a gift that seals a friendship between groups. Making them requires time, steady hands, and materials chosen for their color, their shine, or their rarity, which suggests that people were thinking beyond survival in the narrowest sense. They were investing in identity and in meaning. Portable art also leaves clues about trade, since a bead made from a distant material implies contact and exchange across the land. It can even hint at specialized skill, since some people may have become known as the finest of makers. In a world without writing, a small object can carry a very large message, turning beauty into something that fits within the palm. Small carved figures hint at symbolism and belief we are still trying to read. Small figurines, often emphasizing certain features of the body, appear across parts of Ice Age Europe and beyond, and they continue to puzzle everyone who studies them. Some see them as symbols of fertility, others see them as expressions of identity, ancestry, or social role. Some may have been made by women and for women, as personal objects rather than public icons, while others may have been teaching tools, treasured heirlooms, or markers of which group a person belonged to as they traveled between camps. The sheer variety matters. Not all of these figures looked alike, and not all were made from the same material, which suggests many meanings rather than one simple answer. What is undeniable is the intention behind them. Someone chose to shape the human form and to carry it forward through time. That single act places abstract thought deep in prehistory. It also invites a humbling truth. We can measure the age of these objects, yet we cannot fully recover the private thoughts behind them. And that edge is where history feels most alive. Marks upon the body could signal belonging without a single spoken word. When groups meet, the first quiet question is often one of safety. Are these people friendly, or are they rivals? In a world without passports or flags, the body itself can become a signal. Patterns of scarring, styles of hair, beads, pendants, and paint can all speak of identity at a glance. They can say, I come from this river, I share your allies, I belong to the people who honor this ancestor. Ornaments also carry stories of travel and of skill, since a bead of rare material suggests far-reaching connections, and a carefully shaped pendant suggests patience and mastery. These signals reduce uncertainty, and they can even prevent violence by making intentions legible before anyone is close enough to strike. They also help hold a community together across time, since children grow into the same marks and learn what they mean. In that sense, adornment is not mere decoration. It is a form of communication that gets up and walks about in the world. Tattoos may be very ancient, though skin so rarely survives to prove it. Skin is among the first things to vanish, which makes body art terribly hard to trace. Even so, there are strong hints that marking the body is a very old human impulse. Some ancient tools look well suited to puncturing, and some cultures with deep roots have long used pigments for permanent or near-permanent marks. In rare cases, a preserved body still shows its tattoos directly, reminding us that the practice can carry identity, status, protection, or memory. A tattoo can mark the passage into adulthood. It can record belonging to a group. It can honor a hunt or a loss. It can even serve as a visible promise, since it cannot easily be hidden within a small band where everyone is known. What makes this so fascinating is how personal it is. Tools and hearths show us what people did. Marks upon the skin suggest how people wished to be seen. Even before writing existed, this was history carried upon the self. Musical instruments reveal that sound was woven into early culture. Not all of survival leaves a sharp edge behind. Sometimes it leaves rhythm. Those who dig into the past have found ancient instruments and sound-making objects. which suggests that people were shaping noise into something intentional. Sound can coordinate movement, soothe a restless infant, and pull a whole group into the same emotional weather. It can mark the moments that matter, like a departure, a reunion, or a time of mourning, even where no written words exist. Imagine a night when the wind is loud and the world feels uncertain. A steady, repeated beat can settle the nerves and make near strangers feel like kin. Instruments also imply craft, since you must choose a material, shape it, and test it, which means time was set aside for something beyond mere calories. That choice is quietly revealing. When people invest real effort in sound, they are investing in connection. In the deep past, this may have been a kind of social glue, carried on the breath and the fingertips. Flutes carved from bone suggest that melody was treasured deep in prehistory. A bone flute begins with a decision that has nothing at all to do with hunting. Someone selects a hollow bone and then carefully opens finger holes at just the right places to produce a usable scale. That takes experiment and memory, because a hole set wrong can never be unset. It takes breath control and a listening ear as well, since the instrument only truly comes alive when it begins to sing. When such flutes appear at ancient sites, they hint at evenings shaped by melody and not only by labor. A tune can travel across a camp faster than speech. It can calm a fretful child, invite dancing, or hold attention while a story slowly unfolds. It can even become a signature, since a familiar melody can identify a group before any face comes into view. The surprising part is simply how familiar all of this feels. A flute is a human wish made audible. It says that people longed for beauty, for variation, and for a little emotional color, even in the hardest of times. Steady drumming could carry signals far through dark forests. A drum is not only a maker of rhythm, it is a tool for reaching across distance. In thick woods or across rolling country, a steady beat can travel through the darkness when a shout would fail. Different patterns can mean different things, like an announcement, a warning, or a call to gather. And you need no written code for this, only shared habit and ears trained to recognize the beat. Drumming can also turn a scattered group into a single moving body. Hunters can match their steps to it, and those in camp can keep time for hard labor like pounding plants or working hides. Since rhythm makes work easier when bodies fall into the same swing, it can build courage too, since a strong beat pushes fear toward the edges of the night. The materials are simple, whether a stretched hide, a hollow log, or the very ground itself, and yet the effect is powerful. A drum beat is a message you feel within your chest before you ever understand it. Storytelling may have preserved survival lessons better than any single teacher. A story can carry instruction without ever sounding like instruction. It can warn of a river that rises fast, of a predator that hunts in an unexpected way, or of a plant that looks harmless right up until it is not. Rather than listing dry rules, a story ties knowledge to characters, to mistakes, and to consequences, which makes it memorable, especially for children who learn best through emotion and repetition. In a world always on the move, stories travel easily, since you can carry them with no tools at all, and share them with visitors who bring new knowledge in return. A tale can preserve a route across a whole landscape, the memory of a past drought, or the subtle signs that winter is arriving early this year. It can teach ethics too, about when sharing saves the group, and when selfishness invites trouble. Storytelling is not idle fluff, it is storage. It is how a band can hold a long memory even as its individual elders pass away, a technology built of nothing but voice and attention. The first maps may well have been songs describing routes and landmarks. A song is easy to carry and hard to lose, especially when a community repeats it often, and that makes it a perfect vessel for navigation. A melody can hold a sequence of places in order, like a spring, then a ridge, then a dangerous ravine, then a grove where fruit appears in its season. Rhythm aids the memory, and repeated phrases can mark the key turnings or the warnings along the way. A sung route can even teach children while they walk, so that learning happens in motion rather than in some formal lesson. This kind of mapping would be wonderfully practical in a shifting land, since a song can be updated when a river changes course or a trail grows unsafe. It works across the barriers of language too, because place names and gestures can be shared even when grammar cannot. The idea is humble and yet powerful. Long before ink or paper or the compass, a human voice could draw a route through the whole world. A chorus could be a guidebook. Knowledge of the stars almost certainly guided travel long before the compass. When you sleep beneath the open sky, it grows familiar in a way most of us today will never quite know. The stars rise and set in patterns that repeat, and those patterns can become tools. A bright star low on the horizon can mark a direction. A familiar shape among the stars can announce that the season has turned. The changing face of the moon can help set the timing of a gathering, a hunt, or a long journey. This kind of knowledge asks for no formal science, only close attention and the storytelling that helps names and patterns stick in the memory. Star guidance also works when landmarks vanish, out on open plains, in deserts, or along coasts where the world can look the same for miles. It can steady a journey through the night, when the air is cool and water is easier to spare. It deepens culture as well, for when people share the same stories of the sky, they share a sense of order within a vast darkness. The sky becomes both compass and calendar, held above every camp. The routes people walked underground can still be traced in torch smoke. Caves can be true mazes, and their deep passages are not places you wander into by accident. When people carried torches, the smoke and soot often gathered on the ceilings and along the narrow corridors. Those blackened streaks can become clues. They show which routes were used the most, where people paused, and which chambers were visited again and again. In some places the soot clusters near ledges or tight squeezes, as if groups gathered themselves, adjusted their loads, and pressed on. Sometimes the marks run like a dark ribbon along a ceiling, tracing a path that is still walkable today. This evidence is powerful precisely because it was never intended. No one meant to leave a map. They simply needed light, and light leaves its residue behind. Combined with footprints and the marks of tools, this soot can turn a whole cave into a kind of travel diary. It lets us follow ancient choices, step by careful step, into places that were once utterly black. Even a single stone tool can reveal whether its maker was left or right-handed. A tool is not only what it is also how it was used. When a stone scraper or blade is held and worked over and over, it develops tiny scars, patches of polish, and edge damage that can lean toward one side. Under careful study, those patterns can suggest whether the maker favored the right hand or the left. That may sound small, and yet it opens a doorway into an individual life. Handedness is linked to the organization of the brain, to how skills are learned, and to how tasks were once taught. If a whole site shows a strong preference across many tools, it can hint at a pattern across a population rather than the habit of one person. It also makes the past feel wonderfully personal. Instead of a vague blur, you can picture a specific worker gripping a tool the same way day after day, turning a hide, shaping wood, or preparing food. Wear marks are quiet fingerprints. They tell you that someone's hands once had a style all their own. The footprints of children prove that the young shared in daily life. A child's footprint is a rare kind of evidence because it captures a fleeting moment rather than a tool or a bone. Small tracks preserved in mud, ash, or soft sediment show that children were not kept apart from the work of the world. They walked where the adults walked. They stood near the hearths, followed the paths, and sometimes ran, slipped, or turned suddenly in ways that feel instantly and achingly familiar. These prints also hint at learning in motion, since children most likely watched tool-making, food preparation, and social life up close, absorbing skills through nearness rather than through any formal lesson. A footprint can even suggest the makeup of a group, since different sizes moving together imply mixed ages sharing the same space. This matters for how we imagine early society. Childhood was not a separate, protected bubble. It was woven right into travel, camp, and the daily decisions of survival. In a small heel and toe pressed into ancient ground, we see growth, curiosity, and belonging, all preserved by chance. The first humans watched auroras, comets, and eclipses with genuine awe. Early humans lived beneath skies untouched by any electric glow, so the night would have been thick with stars and startling events. An aurora could ripple like living color across the horizon, turning the darkness into slow motion. A comet could hang for weeks, a bright stranger that changed its shape and then quietly vanished. An eclipse could steal the daylight within minutes, chilling the air and confusing the animals, as if the world had briefly broken its own rules. These sights would not have felt abstract. They would have been felt in the body, in the sudden hush of a group, in the way children pressed a little closer to the adults. Such events surely became stories, because stories are how people make the unknown bearable. Even without any modern science, careful watchers could notice the deeper patterns, like the rhythm of the moon and the faithful return of certain stars. The sky was both theater and teacher. It offered wonder, warning, and the sense that life belonged to something truly vast. Early humans faced their own pandemics, though the evidence is hard to find. Disease rarely leaves a fossil, which makes ancient outbreaks difficult to prove, and yet the first humans were never free from infection. Bacteria, viruses, and parasites moved with people, with animals, and with the water they drank. Close living, shared food, and the tender act of caregiving could all spread an illness swiftly through a small band, and a cough or a fever could turn deadly when food was scarce and the nights ran cold. Sometimes the clearest clues come from the bones themselves, in lesions linked to long infection, or from ancient genetic material that preserves the faint trace of a pathogen. Our genes can hint at past struggles too, since the parts tied to immunity often carry the marks of intense pressure. What makes this so quietly gripping is its intimacy. A pandemic is never only a medical event, it is a social storm that tests trust, care, and decision. Even in the deep past, sickness could reshape a migration, break an alliance, and quietly decide who would survive to have children. The first humans were never primitive. They were inventive under relentless pressure. It is tempting to judge the past by what it lacked, and yet the first humans were solving hard problems with whatever the world placed in their hands. They innovated in materials, in planning, and in social strategy. They learnt to time their movements with the seasons, to spread risk through cooperation, and to shape their tools to specific tasks. Innovation often comes fastest when failure is costly, and early life was full of high stakes. A poor shelter could mean the killing cold. A bad choice of route could mean sickness. A failed hunt could mean hunger for the children. Under that pressure, creativity was not optional but essential, and it was deeply communal, since ideas spread through demonstration, imitation, and patient refinement until a good solution hardened into tradition. What makes this so inspiring is its realism. These were not superheroes. They were people facing deep uncertainty with minds built for pattern, memory, and teamwork. And their inventiveness is the quiet foundation beneath everything we now call modern. To study the first humans is really to study the deepest roots of you. This subject can feel so distant, and yet it keeps circling gently back to the present. When you learn how early humans moved, you learn why your own body is built for long walks. When you learn how they shared food and cared for the vulnerable, you learn why social bonds still shape health and survival even now. When you learn how they marked their identity, you understand why belonging still matters so intensely to us. The first humans also remind us that history is not only kings and battles. It is families choosing routes, children learning by watching, and communities making meaning beneath the open sky. Their world was harsher than ours, and yet it was filled with decisions that still echo through modern life. To study them is like tracing a river back toward its source. The water you drink today flows from that beginning, even though the landscape has changed. In their tools, their art, and their footsteps, you can recognize the earliest outline of your own mind. As we come to the end of our journey, notice how far we have traveled, not across oceans and deserts, but across time itself. We began in ancient Africa, where the first of our kind took shape in a world of shifting grasslands, lakes, and long droughts. We followed the small bands that spread across whole continents, and we lingered at the camps where firelight stretched the night into a place for learning. We met other kinds of humans, and felt the strange and gentle truth that some of them still live on inside our genes. We stood beneath Ice Age skies, watched art appear upon the stone, and listened for the first faint hints of rhythm and story. We imagined the quiet work of hands, twisting fiber into cord, shaping stone into tools, stitching hides into warmth, and turning a shared meal into a community. And now you can let all of that drift softly into the background, like footprints slowly filling with sand. Let the images fade in their own time. A hand pressed against a cave wall, a small circle of light around a hearth, a long path beside a river under the stars. If you enjoyed this slow walk through deep history, you can support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment. It helps these bedtime journeys find the people who need them. And if you are still awake, there will be another video waiting for you on the screen, ready to carry you onward into another quiet story. For now, there is nothing else you need to do. Let your jaw unclench, let your shoulders settle, breathe slowly in and slowly out, and allow the day to loosen its grip while your mind comes to rest in the oldest chapter of human life. Sleep well, and good night.